when you start to run $5, $6 a pound of copper in our models, it's hugely accretive to buy these royalties back. Hence the reason why we're buying them back. And we're making a statement to the market that it's our intention to move this project forward and ultimately build it, put it into production, and have a very strong mid-tier copper company in the heartland of the Arizona Copper Belt.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for June 30th to July 6th, 2025, while supplies last. First this week we feature backdated 1 10th-ounce gold maples at just $45 over melt per coin. Next, 1-ounce silver Swiss Pamp rounds are just $2.59 over spot per ounce. 90% mixed junk constitutional silver is only 99 cents over spot. And finally, backdated 1-ounce platinum platypus coins are just $119 over spot per ounce. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're delighted to have a first-time guest today. George Ogilvie, the president and CEO of Arizona Sonoran, is with us today. George, thank you for joining us this first time on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you, Dunnigan.
We were introduced by Rick Rule because we'll both be your company and my company represented at his upcoming Rule Symposium on Natural Resource Investing in Boca Raton, Florida next month in early July 7th through 11th. And folks, by the way, if you haven't already registered, there's a link in the description of this video so you can sign up either for in-person or virtual attendance. But George, I want to find out more about Arizona Sonoran and introduce you to our audience. Our audience and subscribers have been learning, as I have from Rick, about once a month for the past 10 years about natural resource investing, and he handpicks companies that he has scrutinized very closely, and Arizona Sonoran is one of those that's going to be a presenter and exhibitor at his upcoming conference. Can you talk to us about what Arizona Sonoran is about and what your key areas of activity are, and why our subscribers should take a closer look at what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, thank you. We have the Cactus Project, which is in Arizona in the United States. It's a former producing mine that was in operation for a decade between 1974 and 1984 when it closed, when the mine was uneconomical. It's a large copper porphyry system, and the mine was mined as an open pit at the time. We picked up the asset in early 2020 from a state environmental trust for $6 million US. And since that point in time, we've been drilling on the property. We've grown the resource now to in excess of 11 billion pounds of contained copper in the ground. Last year, we put out a preliminary economic assessment, and using a $3.90 copper price, we got an NPV8 after tax of $2 billion US and an IRR after tax of 24%. And importantly, because it's a brownfield site and it's supported by significant infrastructure in the area, such as roads, access to rail, access to water, access to a community, the main power line runs through the property, it really minimizes the upfront capital. And that means the capital intensity will be below $10,000 a ton, which is very unique for a near-term copper producer. So we're in the midst of completing a pre-feasibility study that'll come to the market sometime before the end of this year. We will immediately go into a bankable feasibility study. And by the time that gets produced towards the end of 2026, we'll have the project financing in place, and we'll make a final investment decision at that point in time. And we're currently estimating an 18 to 24-month construction and development period, which would see first copper cathode being produced in late 2028, early 2029. And this is going to be copper cathode that can be sold right into US industry for manufacturing of copper wire, copper rods. Doesn't have to go offshore for any further treatment. And we think based on the supply and demand fundamentals, it's going to be a product which is going to be highly prized in the US.
we've heard, and it was actually with an interview with Rick, which was entitled Critical Metal Shortage Coming, where we talked about the world's need to have something like on the order of 20 of the largest copper mines just brought into production in the next decade or two in order to meet the anticipated future demand for copper for a number of different reasons. Not just the electrified economy, but so many other things that are going to be demanding copper that has no current line of sight to support. This strategy of taking a brownfield site and redefining and expanding the definition of the resource and reinvigorating the activity there, especially where you have infrastructure support, is one that a number of companies are looking at to try to get a jump start, a head start, or an accelerated path to production. Rick is always interested in scale. He talks about mines as a depleting resource and why he wants to see bigger mines. You certainly got our attention with the numbers you were quoting on this mine. And how much of that 11 billion pounds of copper resource that you have defined came from this additional drilling program that you've been engaging on versus how much did you know about before when you acquired the property?
Yeah, well, when we acquired the property in early 2020, there was a historical surface stockpile, which essentially was low-grade mineralization from the 1980s when the mine closed. It was only 220 million pounds of copper contained in a historical stockpile. And we knew from the historical drilling that there was approximately 3 billion pounds of copper in and around the old historical open pit, which was known as the Sacaton mine at the time. We could visually see the mineralization in the open pit with all the historical core and logs, but it was all non-43-101 compliant. So essentially we had close to 3.3 billion pounds of historical resource. And as I said earlier, over the period of the last 4 years, as we've drilled out the resource, we've increased that almost fourfold to 11 billion pounds of copper and soon to have mineable reserves contained within the pre-feasibility study in the next several months.
Another thing you caught my attention with near the end of your explanation was about U.S. Domestic consuming of your likely output product. This is a big deal. The world has had their eyes opened in the last, I would say 4 or 5 years to the fragility of the requirement or the reliance on offshoring or a global supply chain to a number of different reasons. You got geopolitical strains, you can have the complexities of supply chains that can be interfered with for a number of different reasons. This is a big deal to have domestic supply to meet domestic demand. Can you elaborate a little bit further on that and why that reduces business risk and investor risk?
Yeah. Well, currently right now, the US requires approximately 1.2 to 1.4 million tons of refined copper annually. But today within the United States, only 700,000 to 800,000 tons of that is actually produced locally within the country. So there's another 500,000 to 600,000 tons which actually has to be imported into the US. The other sort of curveball that gets thrown our way is that in a lot of instances the copper is actually produced in a concentrate form. And over the last several decades, we've seen this in the northern and western hemisphere due to environmental, regulations. A lot of the smelters in the northern hemisphere and the west have actually closed. And subsequently, what we find today is that more than 50% of the world's copper in concentrate actually makes its way over to Asia and in particular China, where over the last 10 years, they've been ramping up their smelting and refining capacity, and it's then sold back to the West. So the beauty of this property and this project is that we'll produce copper cathode, which is LME grade A, 99.99% pure, which can be sold directly to US manufacturers and importantly, doesn't have to go back offshore, to be further smelted and refined and then sold back to the West or the US.
You also mentioned before we got started to me that there's a uniqueness to this property in that it's not dependent on federal approvals that can really bog down or slow down, or you can end up with an administration change and boop, that just really dashes your expected timeline to production. How is that possible, and help our potential investors understand why that makes a difference to investors?
Well, because it's a brownfield site and it came into production in the early 1970s, it already had gone through all of the ESIA and environmental impact, studies at that juncture in time. So we benefit from that, but the entire current land package of 5,800 acres is all held on private land. Subsequently, there's no federal land and there's no federal nexus when it comes to the permitting. So we only deal with the state regulators, which is mostly the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality and the Arizona State Lands Department. And when we came out with our PEA as part of our qualifying document in 2021, when we IPO'd the company, that plan that we have today, based on that, the mine today is fully permitted. Now, that plan was only for an 18-year mine life and 28,000 tons of copper cathode production a year. As the resource in the mine has grown and the production profile has grown over the last 2 to 3 years, we've had to go and amend the permits. And once you make an application for an amended permit, once the application is administratively accepted, it starts a clock ticking, and within 6 months, the regulators must give you a response to your permit. So the longest we've had to wait for any amended permit was an amendment to the aquifer protection permit, which took 5 months from when it was administratively accepted to ultimately when the permit was received in our office. Now, of course, the PEA that we put out last year and the PFS is going to mirror this, is going to show a mine life well in excess of 20 years with over 100,000 tonnes of copper cathode production a year. So upon the production of the pre-feasibility study at the end of the year, we'll make applications to have the permits amended, which will be the final permits, which will actually build the mine upon when the bankable feasibility study comes out in the second half of 2026.
You also have some very recent news about buybacks of royalties. We've spoken with our audience and our subscribers numerous times about the benefits to royalty and streaming companies who sell royalties to mining companies in order to provide funding and financing for them in return for a stream of either cash or material off of their operations. Why did Arizona Sonoran buy back the royalties at this time, and how should investors look at that?
Yeah. So these were royalties that when I joined the company in 2021 were already in place. They belonged at that time to a couple of private equity groups called Tembo Capital and RCF. Tembo Capital had a 2.5% NSR on portions of the Cactus project, and RCF had a 0.68% NSR. So combined, we were looking at a 3.18% NSR on a significant portion of the project, the claims. In December of last year, Tembo sold their 2.5% NSR to Royal Gold, who no doubt the viewers and listeners will know is one of the largest royalty companies in the world. We have the ability to buy back 0.5% of that NSR for $7 million US. And just in the last couple of days, we've officially sent Royal Gold the written notification to start the buyback process. And then in 2023, RCF sold their royalty to Elemental Altus out of London. And we have the ability to buy back 0.14% of that for $1.9 million US. So in totality, we're buying back 0.64% NSR for $8.9 million US. Now, when we factored the NSR into our financial and economic model within the PEA, and we used a $3.90 copper price, it showed us that buying back the royalty was accretive, and it put money and value back in the shareholders' hands. And of course, today, with a spot copper price of $4.35, $4.80 plus on COMEX, and a lot of analysts forecasting much, much higher copper prices than that, when you start to run $5, $6 a pound of copper in our models, it shows it's hugely accretive to buy these royalties back. Hence the reason why we're buying them back. And we're making a statement to the market that it's our intention to move this project forward and ultimately build it, put it into production, and have a very strong mid-tier copper company in the heartland of the Arizona Copper Belt.
Our viewers and subscribers are keenly interested in domestic production because there's so much concern about the potential complexities of some jurisdictions and some geopolitical relationships and supply chain complications. As you were describing the getting out of the loop of needing to offshore raw materials and have it smelted elsewhere, brought back again, it's not only dependence on a long supply chain. There's costs, there's delays. It changes the economics of everything. And it's quite interesting. For people who want to dig farther in to find out more about Arizona Sonoran, where should they go?
Well, obviously, they should go to our website, www.arizonasonoran.com, and they'll find out all the company information there. They're more than happy to send me an email as well at Ogilvie@arizonasonoran.com. And I'm usually pretty quick in getting back to any questions that anybody may have, or set up personal, individual virtual Teams calls.
I have a personal anecdote to add to all of this. Is that the name Arizona Sonoran jumped out at me because I was born in Arizona, actually on a Native American reservation there. My parents were missionaries, but one of the places that we visited most frequently as a child was the Sonoran Desert Museum outside of Tucson, Arizona. So it's near and dear to my heart, and I love visiting the desert, and we actually have a number of our children and grandchildren in the state as well. So happy to have that connection as well. And George Ogilvie, CEO and President of Arizona Sonoran, thank you for helping to introduce your company, Arizona Sonoran, for the first time to our viewers here on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you, Donegan.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for June 30th to July 6th, 2025, while supplies last. First this week, we feature backdated 1/10 ounce gold maples at just $45 over melt per coin. Next, 1 ounce silver Swiss Pamp rounds are just $2.59 over spot per ounce. 90% mixed junk constitutional silver is only 99 cents over spot. And finally, backdated 1 ounce platinum platypus coins are just $119 over spot per ounce. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.